How's it going, everyone? It's Blake here with ChessPathways.com, and in today's video, we're going to be discussing the King's Gambit. The King's Gambit is a very aggressive opening, and one of the best known openings in all of chess. White's going to begin the game here with e4, the king's pawn opening. Black plays e5, and now instead of the normal move here, knight to f3, simply attacking this pawn, White plays here this pawn sacrifice f4. This is the starting position to the King's Gambit. It was extremely popular back in the 19th century, the Romantic era of chess, when people weren't as concerned with material considerations or positional considerations, and it was all about getting that big attack on the king. So if that's your style, the King's Gambit might be for you. So let's see what Black can do here. Black's most popular move is to accept the Gambit and take here on f4. Black's not only up a pawn, but White has also weakened this diagonal to their king here, and that makes queen h4 a concern in the near future. But White has ways to deal with this, and from White's perspective, if White succeeds in winning this pawn back by playing something like d4 and then bishop takes f4 in the coming moves, it looks like White's going to be better there. White's going to have complete control over the center and some active lines of development. So in this position, White usually plays knight to f3, developing a piece and stopping this queen from showing up here on h4. And again, if Black does nothing significant here, White's simply going to play d4 and bishop takes f4, and probably be better. So Black's most popular move here is g5, just simply holding on to this pawn and possibly threatening to advance with g4 to kick that knight away and renew the threat of queen to h4. Bobby Fischer even said that this move g5 refuted the King's Gambit, and that White's not going to get enough compensation for the pawn here, but White has many exciting attacking ideas here. One that I want to point out is called the Museo Gambit. Here, White can play bishop to c4, aggressively eyeing this weak point in the black position, this f7 pawn. And if Black plays g4 here, White doesn't move their knight away and allow queen h4 check. White simply castles and gives up a piece. The point is that after g takes f3 and queen takes f3, Black is up a whole piece, but White has a big lead in development. Look at all the black pieces here still on the first rank. Meanwhile, White's already castled, and if White succeeds in taking on f4, White's going to get a ton of pressure here against this f7 pawn. Black can play queen to f6 here, and Black's happy if White takes their pawn back now, because then Black gets to exchange queens, and then their extra piece would probably be winning, but White's not going to take back here on f4. White's going to play e5, sacrifice another pawn in the true spirit of the King's Gambit, and if the queen takes here on e5, then this e-file gets opened up with the queen and king lined up. The main line continues queen takes e5 and d3, where White just opened up this bishop to possibly take on f4. Black can play bishop h6 here now, trying to exchange off some pieces if White takes this pawn. But once again, White doesn't want exchanges. White's going to continue development with knight to c3, threatening to connect their rooks next turn by moving this bishop, and then a rook could show up here on the e-file and pin this queen to the king. So again, very old-fashioned, aggressive chess. White's down a lot of material, but White could get a big attack in this opening. So after g5, bishop c4, some players here with the black pieces will not advance here with g4. They don't want to go into the Museo Gambit. Bishop g7 is another popular move, just simply continuing on with the development here for Black. Here White will often play d4, grabbing the full center here, and White might try to undermine this black pawn chain by playing h4 in the future. Black will often try to play h6 later and try to hold everything together. And again, you get a very typical King's Gambit position. White controls the whole center and has some very active lines of development, but Black remains up a pawn. There are many other exciting lines here in this g5 variation too. Just to show one more, I really liked looking at this line with knight to c3, and the idea is after g4, White can play knight e5 just to attack this pawn. Black gets to play queen h4 in this variation, but White has a nice little idea here. White can block with g3. This looks very bad for White at first. It looks like Black can just take here on g3, and lines are really getting opened here to the White king, but now White can play the surprising queen takes g4. Usually White doesn't offer an exchange of queens early on in the King's Gambit, but if Black accepts this exchange of queens, this position here is okay for White. White is still down a pawn, but even without queens on the board, this lead in development for White and White's space advantage certainly are going to count for something. But after queen takes g4 here, Black might be tempted to try to win a rook. Black has this move g2, check, giving up the queen, but they know they're going to get it right back here in the corner. And meanwhile, White has lost this rook, but this is actually very dangerous for Black. White can play queen h5, and once again we see the weakness here of the f7 pawn. Very hard to defend this pawn. For example, if knight h6, then d4 just taking even more space and threatening to remove the defender of this f7 pawn. This queen's essentially trapped, and white has a great position here. So we've looked at all the craziness that can occur here after g5, black's most ambitious and principled move, really doubling down on accepting this gambit. But black sometimes doesn't want to go for these lines where they come under a big attack. Black sometimes plays this move d5 here, sacrificing a pawn back to try to open some lines for the pieces and accelerate black's development. After white takes here on d5, I have just one sample line to show you. Black can play knight f6. If white develops with bishop to c4, black can still take back there on d5. White can go ahead and get castled. Black can develop here with bishop e7 trying to do the same. And after d4, castles, white can now win this pawn back on f4, but they do have to give up the bishop for the knight to do so. And after bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, white can finally win their pawn back here. And materials equal again. Black did succeed in getting the bishop pair here. White no longer has the pair of bishops, and with the center being so wide open, that could favor black. But white does still have a space advantage here with the d4 pawn in the center, and the position's considered roughly equal. I do want to mention white has another move here after black accepts the gambit. We've only been looking at knight to f3, but bishop c4 is another popular move here. Now at first this looks bad because you're not stopping black from playing queen to h4 check. So after queen to h4 check, it looks like white is going to lose the right to castle here, but that's not a big concern for white actually. White can simply play king to f1, and white's going to gain a tempo on this queen later. White's going to get to play knight f3 with tempo, and with black already being behind in development, it's dangerous to give white some extra tempos here by moving the queen here and then moving the queen back. But that said, of course it is a big concession here for white to have to put the king on f1. That's going to stop white from castling early and getting that rook involved in the attack. So black can certainly consider playing this move queen to h4 check. Some players with black might not want to do that though, because it does let white get that extra tempo with knight f3, so black certainly has other ways to play here. Black can just play knight to f6 and not give that check, and after knight c3, black sometimes plays c6 here, trying to play d5 and open some lines there in the center before white can win this pawn back. So we've seen what can happen if black accepts the gambit, but black has no obligation to. Black can also decline the king's gambit. So let's look at how that can go. Black can play a move like bishop c5 here, just developing a piece and stopping white from playing d4. And white is actually not able to play f takes e5 right now, because queen h4 would be now very strong for black. g3 is no longer playable here for white because queen takes e4 would fork the rook and king, so white would be in big trouble here. This is not what white wants. So the pawn here is tactically defended for the time being. So I just pulled one sample line to show how the game might continue. White can play here knight to f3 and just develop a piece, now threatening that e5 pawn. Black can play d6, and white will often here play c3, trying to expand here in the center and grab more space. By the way, I should mention going back here a couple moves. It would not make much sense for black to kind of change their mind and take on f4 now, because now d4 looks very pleasant for white. This bishop gets kicked away, and white's going to win this pawn back almost immediately. But after d6, c3, black can play knight f6. Very rapid development here from black on the king side, threatening this e4 pawn. If white continues ahead with d4, e takes d4, c takes d4, bishop to b6. White goes ahead and defends that pawn now with knight to c3, but black gets castled very early. In this line, white did succeed in taking the full center here without losing any material, but black's going to pressure that center from afar. Black could possibly play moves like rook to e8, increasing the pressure here before white can get castled, and this is considered a perfectly fine way to play for black. So we've looked at accepting the gambit and playing bishop c5. Black has one other very popular option here, and that is to play d5 here, and this is called the Falkbeer counter gambit. Now black is sacrificing a pawn instead of white. Now we know that white cannot play f takes e5, because once again, after queen h4, now g3 is no longer available because of queen takes e4, and this is very bad for white. But white can take here on d5, and it's probably not great for black to take back. Just like in the Scandinavian defense, white would get to play knight c3 and kick that queen away. And that's not really black's idea here. Black plays the move e4 here, grabbing some space and taking away this f3 square from the white knight. So let's look at how the game might go here. If white plays d3, trying to get rid of this pawn, black can play knight to f6 now to defend it. And if white exchanges now on e4, now after knight takes e4, one of the key points is black is now threatening queen to h4 again. g3 doesn't work once again because now there's knight takes g3. For example, if white played knight c3 here, trying to dislodge this knight, Now queen h4, g3, knight takes g3, and there's a pin here on the rook. So after knight takes e4, white probably has to take the time to play knight f3 here, taking this h4 square under control. But now bishop c5, and we see the idea here that white is weak on this f2 square. White is kind of forced here to play queen e2 and pin this knight, but of course that's not so great having to block in your bishop here on f1, and black can keep developing here with bishop to f5. And black is hoping that all their activity here will compensate them for being down a pawn. I should mention, by the way, that after a d5 here, after white takes on d5, instead of playing e4, black could consider playing e takes f4, but this kind of just leads right back into some lines from the King's Gambit Accepted. We already talked about black taking this pawn on f4 and later playing d5 as a pawn sacrifice to open some lines for the pieces. This is kind of the same thing, just with a different move order. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about this exciting opening. And please make sure you visit chesspathways.com right now and get signed up. It's totally free, only takes 5 seconds to get signed up, and I will send you a free move-by-move guide to chess thinking when you join. So please let me help you on your chess journey. I'm trying to help more players become masters, so please get signed up, chesspathways.com, and I will see you there. Thanks.